In this video, I'm going to go through what I think are the best parallel sets from the 1990s. This was the rise of parallel sets in baseball cards, so stick with me and let's talk about which ones were the greatest. What is going on, everybody? Thanks for joining me on my channel, Brutus on Baseball. I recently put out a video series all about the history of baseball cards. In all of those videos, I touched only briefly on the concept of parallel cards when I spoke about the current state of the hobby and how the sheer number of parallel cards available for every player today has gotten into the hundreds, if not approaching thousands of parallel cards every year. But I didn't really touch on the origins of parallel cards in that video series. So with that recent history of baseball cards video in mind, I thought that I would walk through the history of parallel cards too, to provide a little bit of an introduction before we jump into my favorites of the 1990s. It's important to ask the question first though, what is a parallel card? How is it different from an insert card? Well, a parallel card is essentially an alternate version of a base card from a set. It'll have the same photograph as the base card, but will differ in some other way from the base, usually with a different color border, as in the rainbow color parallels we see now, or a different surface finish that makes it stand out like refractors, or a different stamp or logo on the front. Parallel cards will have the same overall set number as the base card, which is entirely different from insert cards, because inserts are a completely standalone set with its own checklist and does not rely on the base set at all. Now that we have that distinction clear, let's talk a bit about the evolution of parallel sets and some concepts about some examples that are and perhaps are not parallel issues. There's been a whole history of cards released that could be or are considered parallels by some collectors. But I do think there's a distinction between cards that are released entirely separately and cards that are inserted into packs along with their counterpart base cards. In my opinion, true parallel cards are not separate releases. They're inserted right along with the rest of the base set. A great first example of this is the Venezuela top set, starting in 1959 and released mostly in even years during the 1960s. The Venezuela top sets were printed for distribution in Venezuela, a US-friendly Latin country at that time that was exploding economically and seeing its fair share of players appearing in the major leagues. The Venezuela sets used the Topps photos and designs, but to me this is clearly a separate release and not a parallel version. The same can be said for another set of cards that a lot of collectors don't quite understand the relationship, and that is the relationship between Topps and O-Pee-Chee, or Donruss and Leaf back in the day. When you look at the rookie cards of a player like Barry Bonds or Tony Gwynn, or even as far back as somebody like Nolan Ryan, you'll see that they have nearly identical versions of their rookies that only differ with the logo on the front maybe, or perhaps some writing on the back. But these are not parallel cards either. These are entirely different releases with one version, either the Topps or the Donruss, based and distributed in the United States, and the other version, the O-Pee-Chee or the Leaf, produced and distributed in Canada. O-Pee-Chee had an agreement to use the Topps license to produce cards in Canada between 1965 and 1992. Whereas Leaf produced cards in Canada using the Donruss license from only 1985 to 1988. But the key here is that they're separate releases and not parallels. Another example of a well-known set that, in my opinion, is not truly a parallel set is the 1975 Topps and Topps Mini. Topps had standardized the size of a baseball card for the final time in the 1957 season, but the mid-1970s were a time of some economic uncertainty in the United States, and Topps was just as susceptible. So Topps experimented with the printing process, designing a mini version of the cards that would be able to fit many more cards onto a single printing sheet, and that cut down on the production cost significantly. The distribution of these mini cards was also very limited, reportedly to vending machines only in states like Michigan, as well as West Coast states like Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii. Topps mini cards were mostly ignored at the time, but they have gained popularity over the years as they are much more rare than the regular Topps release. But again, to me, this is a separate release and is not really a true parallel. The next most well-known examples are the Topps Tiffany, the Fleer Glossy, and even the Score Glossy cards that were released during the 1980s and into the early 1990s. Topps Tiffany was released every year from 1984 to 1991, and copying that idea, Fleer Glossy was released from 87 to 89, and Score Glossy only in 1988. The difference between the base cards and the Tiffany or Glossy cards from these years is typically based on the type of cardstock used, or the glossy finish on the card fronts. Now, if you ask the average collector, they'll probably tell you these are parallel cards. But the reason I don't really think of these as true parallel sets is because the premium releases, the Tiffany and the Glossy, were released in sealed factory sets only and not inserted with base card releases in packs. They are wonderful high-end cards that mirror their base versions, and they are important, especially with how limited they were compared to their counterpart base cards during the junk wax era. But they were still produced and distributed separately from them. The last example that I'll give of a set that I don't really consider to be a true parallel set is the 1991 Topps Desert Shield. Again, a very valuable and great set to collect, but this set was produced entirely separately from 1991 Topps for distribution overseas to soldiers prepared to fight in the First Gulf War. Only an estimated 7,000 copies of each card were made, many of which likely didn't survive in great condition or even make it back home, making it one of the most sought-after sets of the junk wax era. Even though it is a great set to collect, again, it's just not a true parallel set. And so through all of that history we just talked about, we've come to the first of the true parallel sets that were produced and released in packs to be pulled alongside their base counterparts. The year is 1992, and the parallel card is about to change the landscape of the hobby. I was originally going to make this video a top 10 of my favorite parallels from the 90s, much like I did for my video on the top 10 insert cards of the 90s, but instead I decided to make this video a bit more chronological. Not necessarily a definitive ranking of the best ones, but highlighting my favorites from each year as the parallels became more intricate and complex. My criteria for what I think makes a good parallel is pretty simple. It should look fancy, and it should stand out from its base version in a way that makes it clear that you have a parallel card. An added bonus for me is if the parallel is condition sensitive in one way or another. I like it when it's tough to find the parallel version in good condition compared to the sturdier base cards. So starting in 1992, this is when the first true parallel cards first appeared, with the Topps Gold versions. But this isn't my favorite parallel set in the inaugural year. The Topps Gold were limited to about one card inserted per hobby or retail box and 10 cards per factory set, but they also messed things up a bit by including a Match the Stats game card in packs, where collectors could accumulate runs and send it into Topps to redeem a pack of 10 gold cards. But the problem was that the game cards could be compromised by shining a flashlight behind the cards, and soon collectors everywhere were sending in way more redemptions than Topps had planned for. To combat this, Topps printed the redeemed gold cards with the word winner in gold on the front as well. The gold winner cards are typically much more available than the standard pack-issued gold cards. Upper Deck also tried their hand at a parallel card set in '92 with the gold hologram set, which simply includes a gold hologram on the back of the card rather than the standard silver hologram version. But this set had two problems. The gold hologram cards were the ones issued in factory sets and were not inserted into packs. And the distinction between the base card and the gold hologram version is really difficult to discern, especially when trying to buy a card online. So this brings me to my favorite of the first parallel sets from 1992, and one that I always think of as the gold standard for what a parallel card should look like: the 1992 Leaf Gold cards. The cards look beautiful with black borders that stand out clearly from the base cards, and a gold foil frame, logo, and lettering. Inserted at one per pack, this parallel set was much easier to find, but that was combated by the fact that they were much more condition sensitive. These cards are relatively easy to come by, but at the same time, relatively hard to find in high quality condition. For example, you can find 150 of the Topps Gold and 144 of the Topps Gold Winner in PSA 10 for the King Griffey Jr. cards from '92, with a gem rate of about 39%. But only 11 Griffey cards are available in PSA 10 from '92 Leaf Gold set, with a gem rate under 10%. For collectors out there of older parallel cards, the '92 Leaf Gold is one of the originals and one of my absolute favorites, and is way too often overlooked. Moving on to 1993. Almost immediately in '93, the parallel card took a huge leap forward with one of the best inaugural sets I can think of, which was kind of interesting for this year because it seems that most companies didn't think of parallel cards and that they would take off. Leaf decided not to repeat its Leaf Gold from 1992 with a 93 version, and sets like Donruss, Fleer, Pinnacle, Bowman, Score, they didn't release parallel versions of cards at all. Topps did come back with its Topps Gold as well as factory sets with either the logos of the new teams for the Rockies or Marlins stamped in gold foil on the front, but these sets again were not as appealing as they could have been. Upper Deck again released a factory set of cards with a gold hologram on the back, not advancing at all on the previous year's design. Topps Stadium Club also introduced the first day production concept with the first 2,000 cards that were supposedly printed on the first day of production, stamped with a special mark on the front. The cards weren't serial numbered though, and the stamps didn't change the appearance of the cards much and were easy to remove and counterfeit. Stadium Club's first parallel set was a bit of a miss for me, but the game changer was the first release of Topps' Finest Baseball, and along with it the first set of Refractors. This was the first set printed on chrome stock and was Topps' attempt at an ultra-premium brand. Finest was also the first time that a manufacturer publicly released its production figures, and as a result, even though the Refractors are not numbered, it's estimated that only about 241 copies of each card are available. These cards were extremely condition sensitive and hard to find, and they easily were my favorite pick from 1993. Jumping into 94. The 94 season was when you see a lot more brands take notice of what Topps had accomplished with Finest in the previous season, and they produced parallel sets of their own. Bowman's Best was released for the first time with a parallel set of Refractors. Finest repeated their own Refractors, while Topps repeated their gold parallel that was a step backward from the years before, in my opinion. Donruss made their first feeble attempt at a parallel, while Fleer, which included Flare and Ultra, decided to sit out again. Score came in with its own Gold Rush set, which was good looking and highly condition sensitive, but it was just overshadowed by other sets. Upper Deck came out with the Electric Diamond parallel, which mirrored the way Topps was putting out their gold parallels, but the Upper Deck Electric Diamond versions were more attention capturing in my mind, and I think they did a better job than Topps. But there's two sets here that I specifically wanted to mention in 94. The first is the 94 SP parallel version released by Upper Deck, the first parallel set to be die cut at the top of the card. The base cards themselves were extremely condition sensitive as they were printed on foil board, but the parallel die cut cards were even more condition sensitive because of the unusual angles and edges at the top of the card. This is not my top choice for parallel set of the year, but I figured it was worth a mention just because of that die cut innovation. But my favorite parallel set from 94 was the first parallel set produced by Pinnacle. From what I could tell during my research, 94 Pinnacle may have been the first brand to include more than one parallel version in the same set, including the higher print run Museum Collection and the lower print run Artist Proof. My vote for best parallel of the year for 1994 is easily the Museum Collection. Even though these cards are more widely available, it was the first time I recalled parallel cards being so distinct from the base card across the entire photograph, and the look on Pinnacle's Dufex technology was astounding. This was the first time I do recall being mesmerized by the look of a parallel card itself. By 95, everyone had gotten into the game. For the first time, Bowman made parallels with a short set of gold foil rookie cards. Bowman's Best had their super tough Refractors parallel, and Finest continued with their Refractor set as well. Score went with Gold Rush once again, although a lesser design compared to 94, and Upper Deck doubled down on their Electric Diamond inserts. Donruss took things a bit more seriously with their press-proof parallels this year. In 95, Topps decided to ditch their gold label parallel and instead went with a CyberStats parallel set that used computer simulations to predict player statistics that they would have had the 94 strike not interrupted the season in early August. It wasn't a big hit. Stadium Club had its first day issue again, but weirdly enough, decided to insert them into packs of 95 Topps rather than 95 Stadium Club products. If I had to give an award for the worst parallel set of 95 though, or perhaps ever, it would have to be Studio's attempt at making baseball cards look like credit cards. As with previous years, Fleer again continued to sit out and focus on insert cards, although Ultra did introduce their gold medallion parallels that were underwhelming in 1995. But a key in 1995 was that it was the start of the Select Certified brand, which was Pinnacle's attempt at a super premium brand to rival Topps Finest. Select Certified introduced an important parallel in mirror gold, which had a gold-colored holographic foil layer that was meant to mimic the refractors put out by Topps. The parallel set looked great, but it didn't yet set the standard or make a big enough impact to be the best of the year, in my opinion. At the risk of being boring, my award for the best parallel of 1995 goes once again to Pinnacle. They carried over their two parallel sets, Museum Collection and Artist Proof, and with the lack of a clear, trailblazing parallel in 1995, the Museum Collection once again takes the cake. I think 95 was the pinnacle year of Pinnacle's run, no pun intended. In terms of both card design and the look of the Museum Collection with the Dufex surface, these cards were fantastic. So in 95, once again my favorite is the Pinnacle Museum Collection. Moving on to 96 now. When I think back to the rise of parallel sets in the 90s, I really think of two distinct eras. 92 to 96, when brands were slowly getting on board, starting to think outside the box, while at the same time not yet venturing too far into the unknown. Until the second era came starting with a few select brands in 96 and really picking it up in 1997 and going through the end of the decade. There is some redundancy in 96 with what some of the basic brands put out previously, but it's really the premium brands that took the lead in this year. There also became too many sets in general, and corresponding parallel sets to name all of them here, so I'll have to focus on the best going forward. It should be noted that Fleer finally jumped into the parallel game with their Tiffany set. A nice design with a glossy coating and holographic foil for the nameplates, but they lifted that name from the old Topps parallel sets moniker Tiffany from the 1980s. But it didn't really impress enough to make the top of the list by this time. Pinnacle returned with a new parallel set named Starburst, which was essentially the same as the Museum Collection. But by now, this set felt like it was trying a bit too hard and just couldn't compete with the new innovations by other companies. The first of the best parallels that comes to my mind in 96 is the Bowman's Best Refractors and their introduction of the Atomic Refractors for the first time. The Leaf Limited Gold parallels were beautiful cards too, and even the base Leaf set had a three-tiered parallel system of bronze, silver, and gold press proofs that stood out as well. Another honorable mention should be the first release of Topps Chrome in 96 and the corresponding refractors, although the set was generally not well received at the time it was released. But the runaway winner of the 96 parallel set sweepstakes is the 96 Select Certified set, and their unheard of before 6 tiers of parallel cards that first ushered in the concept of collecting a rainbow of colors for a player's cards. Included were the Certified Red, Artist Proofs, Certified Blue, Mirror Red, Mirror Blue, and Mirror Gold. Not only did this set offer the first rainbow concept, Leaf also drastically limited the total number of parallel cards available and established the set as a super premium brand, which had been intended for the year prior in 95, but hadn't really hit its mark. The parallel cards were not numbered, but it did set the bar for the coming years where more and more insert and parallel cards were systematically reduced to serial numbers of double and even single digits. An honorable mention to all of this in 96 is that for the first time, parallel sets were made for insert cards. Most notable for me was the black parallel version of the 96 Leaf Limited Lumberjack set, serial numbered to only 500 copies for the blacks, which are still really tough to find in good condition. Ultra did the same though, releasing gold medallion parallel cards for each of its insert sets like Home Run Kings and Hitting Machines. A novel idea that I thought was worth a mention. Jumping now to 1997. By then it had become the industry standard that every brand included at least one parallel set, if not multiple. The innovation had skyrocketed as well with a lot of new slick looks. Some of the more notable ones included the 97 Bowman set, and they introduced the International parallel, while the inaugural year for Bowman Chrome used the International but also Refractor and International Refractors. Bowman's Best continued with Refractors and Atomic Refractors as well. 97 also marked the first release by Fleer of their new ultra-premium brand EX2000, which consisted of multi-layered cards that included a front and holographic foil and was underlain by a translucent acetate shadow box. EX2000 produced notable parallel sets, Credentials numbered to 299 and Essential Credentials numbered to 99 only. Essential Credentials in particular were fantastic looking cards. The 97 Donner's Preferred set also introduced some new ideas to the hobby, including a base set that was divided into tiers, with bronze, silver, gold, and platinum cards that are available at different odds. On top of the divided base set, Donruss Preferred also inserted the same bronze to platinum structure for its even harder to find die-cut parallel set, Cut to the Chase. Adding another layer, a 25-card partial parallel set called Precious Metals was also created that featured a ½ ounce of real silver, gold, or platinum embedded into the card. Although a novel idea, the execution of this set really showed that the card companies hadn't yet figured out how to not make things too complex or confusing to collectors. After a couple mediocre years, Topps Finest came back in '97 with some interesting parallel sets, including bronze, silver, and gold tiers as well, with some versions that were imprinted on the front with raised images of the players and deckled edges that made them condition sensitive. Ultra also made some interesting headway with their parallels in '97 with two different sets, the gold medallion once again, but now the platinum medallion. The difference this time though was that Ultra decided to use alternate player images on the card fronts for the parallel sets to differentiate them from the base set, distinguishing the parallel sets not only by the color or label, but the image itself as well. But the premier parallel set of 1997 was produced by Flair Showcase, a brand that had not featured a parallel set prior to '97. And with their first parallel issue, they decided to go all in. The 1997 Flair Showcase set was very confusing for a lot of collectors at that time, as they had only 180 players in the set, but a total of 540 different cards, as each player was featured on 3 different card types called Style, Grace, or Showcase, often referred to as Row 2, Row 1, and Row 0 respectively. Each row was then further subdivided into 3 60-card sections, and that's just the base set. The Row 2 cards were easier to find, while the Row 0 were the toughest to find. Keep in mind that these were all considered base cards, even though it could be seen by some that Row 1 and Row 0 could be parallel sets themselves in some way, because they had all the same card numbers for a given player. Beyond this argument though, Flair Showcase also included 2 parallel versions beyond the row cards. The Legacy set that featured reflective blue foil for the nameplate and logos on the front, and the Masterpiece that had purple foil for the nameplate and logos on the front. What made these parallels incredibly special though was that the Legacy cards were serial numbered to only 100 copies each, while the Masterpiece cards were the first ever to reduce print runs to only 1 card, labeling the backs of the cards with the only one-of-one Masterpiece. The first one-of-one cards ever produced, the concept would forever change the hobby in the years to come. Although, as a side note, I would point out that since the base set used the Row 2 to Row 0 concept, there were really 3 one-of-one cards of each player in the '97 Flair Showcase set, although all 3 of those player Masterpiece cards would look different. After Flair changed the landscape in '97, we're going to jump ahead now to '98. The world of parallel cards had changed forever by this time. It would take a few decades to get the sheer number of parallels we now have in the hobby today, but by '98, the concepts of a rainbow of parallels and ultra-rare one-of-ones became a staple. This was also the time when one-of-one printing plates started showing up in the hobby as well. Shiny surfaces and die cuts became the norm, and many parallel sets now featured serial numbered cards well under 100. There's so many parallel sets I could mention here by this time, but I'm going to keep these last 2 years of the '90s pretty straightforward. Bowman Chrome both celebrated their 50th anniversary of Bowman first making cards in 1948 with the golden anniversary parallel sets, serial numbered to only 50 each. EX 2001 featured an odd and confusing parallel set for Essential Credentials, where each parallel card had 2 different designs and different serial numbers based on that player's card number in the set. It's too difficult to try to explain here for the purposes of this video, but it was a weird idea. There were essentially 101 parallel cards for each player produced, even though there were 2 types that looked different. Flair Showcase came back again with a similar set with multiple rows of base cards, Legacy parallels numbered to 100 and Masterpiece parallels numbered 1-of-1 again. And Flair had a cool idea for a parallel set called Vintage 63, which used the design of the 1963 Fleer cards to raise some awareness of that long forgotten set. Pinnacle Certified planned to release a number of parallels to continue the Totally Certified and the Mirror Gold and Mirror Black sets, but their bankruptcy in mid-1998 caused most of these cards to never be printed. And Ultra went ahead again with their gold medallions and platinum medallions, and this time they limited the platinum parallel set to only 100 serial numbered copies for Series 1 and 98 serial numbered copies for Series 2. No idea why they made the difference. In addition to these, Ultra also included a Masterpiece parallel set, which was made up of 1/1 serial numbered cards as well. But of all the fancy and limited parallel sets of 1998, the one that sticks out the most to me is the 1998 Metal Universe Precious Metal Gems, numbered to only 50 of each player. These cards were not only phenomenal to look at, but the buzz around this set permeated not only through baseball, but through the other major sports as well. There's actually an interesting story here. The 97 Metal Universe baseball set didn't include any parallel sets in it, but released later that year, the 1997-98 Metal Universe basketball set included the first Precious Metal Gem cards. The release of 98 Metal Universe baseball, therefore, followed on the heels of all the hype around these cards from the basketball set, which to this day are still some of the most sought after cards from the 1990s, in basketball or any sport really. And with the Precious Metal Gems now on the menu in 1998, we're going to move into the last year in 1999. Coming into the home stretch for the 90s, we have seen the foundation being laid for the world of parallel cards we see today in the hobby. But at the same time, not much really changed in 1999 from what we had seen evolve rapidly in 97 and 98. Flair Showcase came back again with the same Legacy and Masterpiece sets, numbered to 100 and 1/1 respectively. EX Century went with their oddly serial numbered Essential Credentials parallel set again, and Bowman and Bowman Chrome went with the same, the International Refractor scheme, although they did add a new Gold International Refractor with parallel that was numbered to only 25 copies each. 1999 Metal Universe also came back with the Precious Metal Gems parallel set, serial numbered to only 50 again, but they added in a new Gem Masters parallel set that was serial numbered on the back with the only 1/1 Gem Masters, an obvious take from the Flair Showcase set. But if I'm being totally honest here, which I always try to be, nothing really stood out to me in 99 as trend-setting or truly innovative that we didn't see in 97 and 98. It could be that my slight indifference is directly related to my feelings about the hobby around this time, when there were just so many sets out there that there's no way I could have had a grasp on all the parallels by this time. So if anyone watching has a favorite 1999 parallel set that I didn't mention, let me know in the comments below. If I had to pick a favorite, which I kind of do because this is my video, I would probably go with the 1999 Ultra set. Partly because I haven't given them a win yet in this video, and partly because I really like the look of these cards in 1999. They of course unrolled the gold medallion and platinum medallion versions again, as well as the Masterpiece set that were serial numbered 1/1 cards. But what really stands out to me, like I said, is the design and the deep royal purple colored matte foil finish on the front. Amazing looking cards that pictures just don't do them justice. It's better to see them in person if you can find them. So that is a wrap of my video summarizing the best parallel cards from the 1990s. I hope you enjoyed this walk down memory lane if you're over 40, or perhaps that you've enjoyed a nice history lesson if you're under 40. Tell me in the comments what your favorite parallel sets were from the 1990s. And if I could ask for one favor, share a link of this video with anybody that you think would enjoy it. Until next time, keep talking baseball, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you around.